All right, so welcome back to our video recorded lecture. So we are now done with the first part of this video. This is already the second part and hopefully matapos ko na po ang discussion natin. Okay? So we are done with the four approaches of policy making process, and this time we'll talk about the characteristics of policy making process. Okay? So ano-ano nga ba yung characteristics na to? Okay? So the first characteristic is that policy making is complex and multi-actor. Ano ibig sabihin yan? Policies are rarely produced by only one person or one institution. Otherwise, we are on the state of dictatorship or kaya authoritarian rule or kaya monarchical system kung saan iisang tao lamang ang nagbibigay or nagpapahulog ng isang batas. Okay? In this context, when you say it is complex and multi-actor, we have your legislators. Okay, legislators can be senators, congressmen, sangguniang bayan members, sangguniang panunsod member, or mga councilors and board members. Okay, we also have your executives, the bureaucrats, the courts, the interest groups, the civil society organizations. We have your media and the citizens. They all potentially they are all potentially participating in the process. And importantly, my dear friends, they do not necessarily want the same thing. Okay? Kaya nga nagkakaroon ng politika there, if we go back to politics and administration, doon nagkakaroon ng politics because there is conflict, there is competing interest, there is now disagreements, and that is a very essential ingredient of politics, yung misunderstanding, yung conflict. Okay? Number two, or the second characteristic, is that policy is power driven. And this is something we cannot ignore. In theory, everyone may have the opportunity to participate. Yes, that's the essence of democracy. But in practice, not everyone enters the policy-making process with an equal power. No? Hindi pantay-pantay ang kapangyarihan po, my dear friends. Ibig sabihin po niyan, the stronger or the more powerful you are, then the more chances and the louder your voice is in the policy making process. No, there's a large business organization, for example, they have the financial resources and direct access to decision makers. No, kaya nga there are times na sinasabi ang panahon natin ngayon is governed by the elites, mga elitista, because these business owners and these business tycoons, they control the powers of the politicians to decide, no? Sasabihin nila, popondohan ko kayo ngayong election pero sa akin ang mga kontrata, mga ganong mga arrangements. So in that case, yes, it is definitely power driven, no? For example, an advocacy organization may have technical expertise, so meron silang tinatawag na expert power. Sila lang yung may kapangyarihan mag-decide because they know the technicalities behind it. Okay, the media may control public attention, especially right now, no? Bakit mas pinapaboran yung mga vloggers as compared to broadcast media? Dahil nga mas nakaka-capture ng mga vloggers yung emotions ng mga tao. May mga pagkakataon na rage baiting ang ginagawa nila, no? And even tayong mga ordinary citizens, pag meron tayong numbers, kaya napakahalaga ng majority, no? Especially when public opinion becomes politically significant. So, policy making is not merely about asking who has the better argument, but ang question dapat dito ay who has the power to make the argument matter. Okay? Number three, policy making is iterative. What does it mean? Okay? Policies change. They constantly change. They are amended, revised, expanded, reduced, sometimes reversely, or sometimes they can be reversed entirely. No? Kaya naman class, you have to take note that may mga policies na gumagana ngayon, but in the future or sa mga susunod na mga panahon, mga buwan, taon, magbabago po yan at hindi na siya relevant. Okay? So it's very important for us public administration professionals, no, lalo sa inyo in the future, na maging at par, maging updated sa news, sa forecast, etc., etc. Okay? And for example, no, a policy that works today may become inappropriate or obsolete 5 or 10 years from now because of social, economic, technological, or political conditions na magbabago. And finally, okay, policy making is value laden. Katulad din po sa politics, it is value laden. Every policy decision involves choices about values, no? Efficiency versus equity, freedom versus security, no? Economic growth versus environmental protection. And I think this is a classic example of Pax Silica. No? The Pax Silica presents a very promising economic growth provided that it will yield thousands of jobs, job opportunities for the people. It could increase potentially yung income ng Pilipinas. So practically, yayaman ang bansa po natin by Pax Silica. But at what expense? Okay? Should we sacrifice our environment? Okay? Take note na meron tayong tinatawag na environmental law. And it says that for every action, we must consider its impact to the next 7 generation. Sa susunod na 7 henerasyon, can you think that the Philippines can still survive? Okay? Provided na mausang to amin nga danuman for that matter. Okay? There are also situations where we will be asked about our individual choice versus collective welfare. Di ba? Isasal mo ba ang iisang tao pero mamamatay yung 50 na citizens? Those are now what we call as value-laden concepts. Okay? Now, take note. Let me just emphasize this one. This is precisely yung apat na sinabi ko. We have um, the 4 characteristics. We have complex and it involves various actors. It is power driven. It is iterative and it is value laden. Why? Because we have to take note, my dear students, my dear class, that this makes now precisely why many policy controversies cannot be resolved by data alone, no? Hindi enough ang research. Yes, you have done it rationally, no? But there are let's take this for example. There are two policymakers, okay? They may look at exactly the same evidence and still they can disagree because they prioritize different values. Let's take for example the issue on teenage pregnancy. Pareho tayong dalawang senador na um, naaalarma, namomroblema sa pagtaas ng kaso ng teenage pregnancy. No? Pero ako, for example, I am for pro-choice. Ibig sabihin yan, let's do all means necessary para po sugpuin ang teenage pregnancy. That is through the promotion on the use of contraceptives like IUDs, condoms for men and women. Yes, may condom pang mga babae. Even tubal ligation, vasectomy for men, di ba? Pero, yung kasama kong senador, ayaw niya yung pinopropose ko. Take note ha, pareho kaming gustong isolve ang teenage pregnancy. Sa akin, pro-choice ako. So, payag ako sa mga natural and synthetic contraceptives or contraceptions. Siya naman is pro-life. Okay? So, sabi niya, dapat paigtingin natin yung family planning kung saan dapat i-promote ang abstinence. Wala mo ng sex before marriage. So, doon, parehas kami ng problemang gustong isolve, nagkakaiba kami sa alternatives. So, it becomes extremely political per se. So, yeah, no? We have different values. Siya, sabi niya, they honor now yung sanctity of life and that we need to actually adhere to the laws of our Almighty Creator. Ako naman sa science, ako for example. So yeah, public policy is technical also. That's very correct, no? But it is not entirely technical because meron nga mga competing interests kung saan nag-aaway-away minsan ang mga politiko. Okay? Now, there are three additional characteristics that we need to understand. So, four kanina, ngayon naman tatlo pa. Okay? The fifth one is it is context dependent. Okay? The same problem can produce very different problem one way um, while the other LGU would try to address it. No? So, may isang problema, iba-iba yung kanyang approaches, kaya nagkakaroon din ng um, mas malala pang problema. So nakadepende sa konteksto ng LGU kung paano nila po i-implement yung batas. No? Even neighboring municipalities, okay, they may adopt different approaches because their resources, their leadership, their political environment, and even their local conditions are different. Okay? Number six is policymaking is subject to uncertainty. Policymakers frequently make decisions without knowing exactly what will happen afterward. So, kumbaga, para itong risk-taking. Sumusugal sila. Okay? Let's think about major government intervention. Before implementation, class, can policymakers guarantee exactly how citizens will respond? Di ba hindi? Nakadepende yan sa pagtanggap ng mga tao. Can they perfectly predict economic consequences? Di ba mahirap? And can they anticipate every implementation problem? Usually the answer there is no. Okay? Government makes decisions using the best information available at that time. But of course, uncertainty remains. Okay? And the last one would be that policymaking is open to influence. No? Lobbying, advocacy campaigns, media coverage, academic research, name it. No? Even public consultations and social media, they can all affect policy decisions. Kaya nga sa policy environment, they are all included. No? Sometimes, that influence either improves policy making because decision makers receive better information and hear from affected sectors. However, influence can also create problems when certain interests have substantially greater access to government than the others. And if we try to take this together, these characteristics explain something very important. And you have to take note of this. Actual policy making rarely looks as clean as the policy cycle drawn in our book. The textbook gives us the stages. That's policy cycle. But in reality, no, it gives us negotiation, uncertainty, influence, competing values, unequal power, and multiple actors. And that is the environment in which public administrators actually work. Now, who are in the room, who are the actors, or who are the key policy making actors. Okay, number one, of course, and this is the most important, legislators. They are the members of the Congress and members of local sanggunians who formally introduce now measures. They try to deliberate on them, and then they try to propose amendments, and they try to vote. No? The second would be our executives. At the national level, our chief executive is the president. Okay. At the local level, we have in the provincial government, we have the provincial governors, and even in the city and municipal governments, we have the mayors. Okay. And likewise, sa barangay, it would be the punong barangay. No. Now, executives approve or veto legislation and also exercise their own policy powers or policy making powers through executive orders and administrative issuances and control over implementation and budgets. Okay? The third would be our bureaucrats. And for public administration students, please pay particular attention to this actor. Why? You have to take note that bureaucracy does not merely obey policy. The bureaucracy also helps shape policy. No? The agencies formulate implementing rules and regulations. Pag may bagong batas sa ginawa ang Kongreso patungkol sa education, then the Department of Education or the Commission on Higher Education or the Technical Education and Skills Development Authority or TESDA, gagawa sila ng IRR nito para po mas maging smooth yung implementation niya. We also have the technical personnel that give pieces of advice to political officials. We also have the frontline workers who interpret rules and administrative discretion which affect now how policies are actually experienced by citizens. Okay? The fourth actor would be the courts. Through the power of judicial review, courts may determine whether government action complies with the Constitution and existing laws. The fifth one would be our interest groups. No? We have business organizations, labor groups, professional associations, sectoral organizations, and even other organized interests that may lobby government um, proposals for favorable policy outcomes. The sixth would be our media, broadcast media, mass com media, print media, etc. Okay? The media can frame an issue and influence what receives public attention. 'Di ba? Minsan yung mga napapanood nating mga movies and etc. etc. Yun. Okay. And of course today, we include the social media, 'di ba? Tingnan niyo yung mga content na ginagawa ni Daryl Yap, 'di ba? Nakakagalit yung iba, rage baiting siya pero ang lakas na kumita. Kaya million-million yung kinikita niya. Okay? Now, a concern that government ignored yesterday may suddenly become urgent when it becomes viral, no? Next, civil society organizations. We have the non-governmental organizations or NGOs. We have the people's organization or the POs, advocacy groups, and other organized citizens. And lastly, citizens themselves, tayo. Okay? We vote. We file petition. We attend public hearings. We participate in consultations. We organize. We protest. We demand accountability. So, whenever you ask or analyze a policy, ask who was in the room. Sino ang mga tao sa likod ng pulisiyang ito? Okay? Also, you have to ask a more difficult question. If you ask the question who was in the room, better also ask the question who was not in the room. Because sometimes understanding whose voice was absent tells us just as much about the policy as knowing who participated. Okay? Now, we proceed with the next one. Paano nga ba nagiging batas ang isang panukala? Okay? And I do understand that most of you submitted this kind of process. Okay? I will consider that, yeah. But later on, I will be presenting a different approach wherein it is intensive and more comprehensive. But for the purposes of general understanding, this is the process of how a bill becomes a law on a national level. Okay? Of course, the first step would be to file the bill. Okay? So, there is a bill filed by a member of the Congress. It will be assigned. It will be assigned to a specific number, and it will be referred to a specific committee. And then within the committee, there will be deliberation. The committee shall study now the bill, they hold public hearing, and they prepare the report. Okay? Now, once the committee deliberation was transmitted, it will go through now the second reading. The second reading will open for floor debates. It will have some amendments. And of course, most substantive decisions happen here. Dito na nai-scrutinize ang policy. On the third reading, final voting lang yan. Okay? No more amendments. And of course, kailangan ng majority vote. Okay? Sa Kongreso natin, dalawang houses. Kaya nagkakaroon tayo ng tinatawag na bicameral conference. They try now to reconcile differing House and Senate versions into one. And then nagkakaroon na ng presidential action kung saan pipirmahan ng Pangulo ang isang batas within 30 days. Otherwise, automatic magiging batas ang isang bill kapag hindi po ito pinirmahan ng Pangulo. That's the congressional override. And of course, publication and effectivity. Okay? So, this is practically the most generic one. And ito, general knowledge ito. I am expecting more sa public administration in your output. And makikita natin mamaya kung anong hinahanap ko based on the next presentation I will be giving you. This is just for the national level. We proceed with the executive policy making. What are examples of executive policy making? Okay, we have executive orders, direct executive or agencies on policy and administration. They have the force of the law, just like batas, and walang kailangang approval sa Kongreso. We also have AOs or administrative order. These are established. This is to establish rules and regulations within the executive branch. We also have presidential proclamations. Okay, like a state of calamity, national holidays, and even territorial boundaries. Okay? We also have department orders or memoranda. Tulad sa atin sa higher education, we have the CMO or CHED Memorandum Order number blah blah blah. The order blah blah blah. Okay? And then we also have the national budget or GAA, the most powerful policy instrument in the Philippine government. In terms of local policy, we have it is governed by RA 7160. And who are the policy bodies in the local government? For provincial government, we have Sangguniang Panlunsod. Sangguniang Panlalawigan. The city government has Sangguniang Panlunsod. The municipal government has Sangguniang Bayan, and of course, the barangay with its Sangguniang Barangay. Okay? Now, how is a local ordinance made? Of course, it must abide now the RA 7160 provisions. Okay? Let's talk about the various policies created under the local government. We have ordinances, resolutions, and localized special bodies. Okay. Ordinance has the force of law. They are permanently binding on residents, such as anti-smoking ordinances, zoning, and even local health code. Whereas resolution, these are merely expression of the Sanggunian's sense or opinion, and they are not permanently binding. Examples would be commendation, request to a national agency, etc. Okay. Of course, we have specialized bodies like SK Federation, okay, under RA 10742, okay, where the SK chairperson sits as an ex officio member on the Sangguniang Barangay. And then the SK Federation President sits as an ex officio member of the Sangguniang Bayan or Panlunsod. And of course, the president or the overall president of the provincial shall sit now as an ex officio member of the Sangguniang Panlalawigan. Okay? We also have specialized bodies, no? And these are to enable now participatory mechanisms. We have the Local Development Council or LDC, which formulates now the CDP or Comprehensive Development Plan and Annual Investment Program or AIP. The local school board, which manages the Special Education Fund or SEF, and it sets now education priorities. We have the local school board, local health board, advises on health legislation, budgets, and programs. We also have the LPOC or the Local Peace and Order Council, and of course the local DRRM Council as well for the disaster risk reduction and management. Okay? When the bureaucracy makes policy, kailan naman po gumagawa ang mga members ng bureaucracy? Okay? Rule making, well, of course, the agency issues now implementing rules and regulations or IRRs. We also have adjudication, yes, they function quasi judicial decisions, and of course discretionary decision making processes. Okay? Now, um, the Philippines is a distinct organization in terms of its policymaking processes. Okay, it has a strong presidential system. Yes, because we have a presidential form of government. Definitely, the executive remains to be a dominant in terms of controlling the legislative majority. We also have political dynasties, hindi pa rin maiiwasan po yan. Usong-uso din po ang patronage politics today. And of course, ang kagandahan naman dito, we have civil society engagement, there is multi-level governance, and of course, there is a strong presence of media and social media influence. Okay, let's talk about some of the policies that we have today as our case study. Okay, we have RA 11479 or Anti-Terrorism Act of 2020. Okay, so first, agenda setting. Ano nangyari? There are security concerns and even growing insurgency, which motivated now the executive branch to push for a stronger counterterrorism framework. This is during the time of former President Rodrigo Duterte. Sinasabi nila, marami daw mga NPAs, even in the universities, and I don't think so. Number two, formulation. Nagkaroon ng paggawa ng panukalang batas. It was greatly adopted and it was implemented, and it's already been 6 years now. So, pwede na natin evaluate ang RA 11479. Okay? Another one is RA 11223 or the Universal Healthcare Act or UHCA. Okay? Ito naman po yung pag-o-open na ng mga healthcare systems sa ating bansa. Okay? So I think I will leave this as your reading assignment instead. Okay? So that ends our lesson for today. I will be giving you another video recorded lecture this time, yung mismong process, no, the more complex process of policymaking in the Philippines. As I end, we have to take note that policymaking is never purely rational, yes. It was never purely technical or even purely clean. It's always a negotiation between values, between interests, and between the possible and the ideal. And I think that's it for my discussion on the policy making process. Wait for my discussion on the policy making process specifically for the national, city, and barangay levels. With that, thank you so much for your time and see you on the next part. Bye bye.